Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to look at Unit 9.3, Technological Advances, Debates about the Environment after 1900. Our learning objective is to explain the causes and effects of environmental changes in the period 1900 to present. So causation is our primary skill here. So we're kind of just thinking about some claim development and just going to do some causation specific. Like this here. All right, so the environmental movement. All right, so the environmental movement, I guess I will start off by saying this is definitely not my wheelhouse, my strength. I guess I am pretty aware of it in a lot of ways, but but as far as really having dug into both sides of the topic, I will definitely plead some ignorance here to this. So, I will do my best to present a couple sides, right, to some of this stuff. Okay. All right. So, impacts of the environment, right? Deforestation, desertification, air and water pollution, global man-made climate impact. All right. So, let's just kind of say I don't, because we're in the United States. I don't think there's anyone seriously out there from either side of this, quote unquote debate that is out there saying, that climate change does not occur. Climate change obviously is a natural part of the history of our planet, right? And so I think we can start off with that. I can also kind of think we can start off, right, with the assumption that there is no one out there in the United States politically, advocating that they want more air pollution or they want more water pollution, or that they don't want, things to be as good as they could possibly be. All right, so I think that is a decent starting point. I don't think there's anyone out there calling for to cut down every forest, and so I think that is kind of a good starting point, right? But I also think maybe a good starting point for this is kind of going back to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. So we're gonna watch a couple of video clips. Normally I would just kind of post them because I don't really like watching those videos on this thing. But I've been having a bear lately, trying to keep videos alive. They keep getting taken down for obvious reasons. So we're gonna just watch this, and I'm just gonna kind of present it like I would in class. So I apologize, because this isn't the best way. Right. So this is just a little intro to Rachel Carson in BBT.
The shape of forms of insects. Challenge the way we look at chemicals at nature, giving us a new vision of the future. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, tonight on the American Experience.
Good evening and welcome to the American Experience. I'm David McCullough. It's happened many times. A book, a single book, has changed American life, changed our history. The book itself became the American Experience. The jungle times captured by Harry Stowe, from a woman who started the Civil War in 1906. In 1906, a book called The Jungle by Humphrey Sinclair awakened the country to the horrors of the Chicago stock jungle. Less than 6 months, understand political thought. Closer to our own time came Ronald Reagan's unsacred speech. Right, America. Tonight's story is about something important already. This time is brave, lively author Rachel Carson. It was not Rachel Carson who discovered the deadly pesticide in the world, or where she could first write about it. But she did it both as a scientist and as a writer of exceptional talent. She began her landmark work in 1950 when a woman was extremely rare. Number 2, she was on her own. The whole university worked to go back. And no universities, politicians, not television or the newspapers sounded the alarm as she did. Rachel Carson changed our lives, changed how we think about the world and our place. Rachel Carson.
And her kind of backstory is pretty interesting. If you actually watch the full PBS documentary on her, she was a government bureaucrat, and her position put her into a place where she was receiving, massive amounts of data coming from university professors and their trials and their research. So she was kind of in a unique position when it came to access to data. We're going to watch a little bit of this. This is kind of a longer clip, so we're going to kind of watch and kind of break this down a little bit, and then we'll come back to it.
Called the most controversial book of the year. Rachel Carson's push to limit the use of powerful pesticides like DDT helped spark the American environmental movement. Rachel Carson is one of those rare individuals who brought about change in all of our lives. But the seeming loss of this pesticide in the fight against malaria also turned her into a poster child for environmental regulation gone too far. DDT was eliminated and malaria made a comeback, and millions of children in the third world have died because of this nonsense. Although environmentalists worship her, I say, she's a mass murderer.
If you discredit Rachel Carson, you discredit the founding principle of the EPA. The idea that Carson gave DDT such a bad name that it was banned in much of the world is a gross oversimplification.
As the world continues its fight against malaria, what lesson does Silent Spring hold?
She was a very soft-spoken soul who loved nothing better than going down to the tide pools of the rocky Atlantic shores and studying creatures and their habitats and their relationship to each other.
The naturalist and science writer Rachel Carson spent decades urging Americans to see the beauty around them. But in 1962, Carson published Silent Spring, and her message took on a markedly different tone.
Man is part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself.
To Carson, that war was exemplified by the growing use of DDT, a potent synthetic insecticide that was so revered for its ability to kill malaria-carrying mosquitoes during World War II that its discovery led to a Nobel Prize.
This diabolical weapon of modern science takes millions of humans, but kills billions of insects. Man, with his newly discovered force, has at long last gained the upper hand in our age-long struggle.
DDT was soon billed as the solution to every insect pest. And in time, upwards of 80 million pounds was being sprayed annually in the U.S. alone, applied to everything from vast forests and cropland to spreading tracts of suburban American homes.
This was the advent of better living through chemistry. DDT was the wonder child.
Once the bug comes in contact with DDT, well, the effect is disaster.
Basically, like a chemical holocaust against these things, actually turned lots of insect populations down, but it wasn't enormously effective.
But Carson's research showed the massive spraying of DDT and other insecticides was causing a hidden harm.
Carson forced us to consider an invisible threat, something that we might not smell, we might not see, but which had all kinds of unintended consequences.
We poison the caddisflies in a stream, and the salmon worms dwindle and die. We poison the gnats in a lake, and the poison travels from link to link of the food chain. We spray our elms, and the following springs are silent and ramen song.
Right, and what you're seeing there, just in case you're not familiar, right, let me just kind of throw this out real quick. Is this belief, right, that when you introduce things into the food chain, that they worked their way up the food chain. And this would have been, by the time she wrote her book, a pretty accepted thing within the scientific community. And obviously what happens in Minamata, Japan in the 1950s is a major part of this. So I know in class we've already watched this, at least in most of my classes. You know, when we talked about the Industrial Revolution and consequences of it, you know, but I'll try to post a link to this on the site, right? But if you're not familiar with it, I will warn you, some of the images here are a little hard to watch because it's actually showing you real footage. These aren't actors, real footage of the effects of mercury. And of course, the story in Minamata, Japan, is that there was a nitrogen-based fertilizer factory, and they were, producing their fertilizer, and the byproduct of their production was mercury, right? And that mercury was being dumped into the bay, Minamata Bay, where it then worked its way up the food chain and began to be, people would see the effects of it on the human population. Loss of control of the human body, attacks the nervous system, eventual death. All right, so that's what's being referenced there when saying that DDT had something in it that was persistent, right, within the human body, right? So they're referring to that kind of thing that we do know about mercury, right? And this is when it comes to heavy metals like mercury, like lead. Once they enter into the human body, there's no way to flush it out, right? So this is why today, pregnant women are encouraged to not eat food, fish specifically that are on the top of the food chain, right? So, and even foods like, canned tuna, is generally, I think the current recommendation is like once a week, right? So it is a great source of a lot of nutrients. However, you do need to limit, right? Because the mercury that you're consuming will pass through the placental wall, right? And once once it gets into your baby's system, it'll be part of your child's for their entire life, right? There's no way to get that out of the system, right? So that's what she's referencing there.
She alerted us to the possibility that in trying to improve by nature, we were actually poisoning ourselves. But to have a woman question the authority of science and of scientific men was something that created a great deal of discomfort in some quarters and downright hostility in others.
Time magazine called Miss Carson's book an emotional and inaccurate outbreak. The major claims in Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts. If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
But as evidence mounted that DDT was a persistent and damaging environmental toxin, its pervasive spraying raised increasing political and scientific alarm.
A well-backed scientific panel today reported that pesticides may indeed represent a grave threat to mankind. The average American already has more DDT in his body than is prevented from eating fish that we eat. But after a rain, it accumulates, and it passes to babies who are in milk.
By the 1970s, Carson was being hailed as an environmental hero, while DDT was in retreat, with a host of developed countries, including the U.S., severely limiting its use.
Silent Spring forced us to reconsider a fundamental faith in science and technology.
But as the decades passed, the disaster some critics had predicted seemed only too near.
In Africa and Asia, the mosquito is a mass killer. More than 2 million people die every year from malaria, which mosquitoes transmit.
The Centers for Disease Control estimates that a child in Africa dies from malaria every 30 seconds.
And the critics knew just whom to blame.
By the 1960s, DDT had all but eradicated malaria. Then came Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring book. Her leading bestseller got the pesticide DDT banned.
But the progressive nutballs had it wrong, as usual.
And what is the result of DDT being banned? Malaria out of control in third world countries where before it had been nearly eliminated.
But places like
All right, so let's stop there, and we'll come back and watch a little bit more of this in a second. Okay, so this is one of those things where this is not a U.S. history class. This is a world history class. And so what are the effects of the environmentalist movement on the world? Right? What are the global implications? What are the world implications of this? Was Rachel Carson, when she was publishing her book, do you think she realized the implications of what was going to happen? The creation of the EPA in the United States. Did she really think? Did she think it was going to be banned worldwide? It is a really interesting example of a very well-intentioned individual advocating for change in their country that has global implications, right? That has global implications that ended up being very deadly, right? So, 1 to 2 million people per year die in the developing world of malaria, right? Malaria alone. And this is one of those things where in the United States, did we make the right choice to eliminate DDT? Maybe, right? I think a case could definitely be made that it was an appropriate thing in the United States to ban DDT in the United States, since there are some negative things that are associated with it. I don't know enough about the topic, to argue anything other than that. Okay, I'm sure some could, but the primary reason why you would really want to have it, we had eradicated in the United States, right? So that being, like, we literally live in a part of the United States that had malaria 70 years ago. 70 years ago, we had malaria right here throughout the southeast of the United States. But because of DDT use, we eradicated it. All right, those eradication efforts, were being spread around the world in the 1960s and 70s. By the United Nations, WHO, that kind of stuff. Right, and before they were able to fully eradicate malaria, the programs were halted, right? The pesticide corporations that made DDT stopped producing them. And even if they were being produced, no one attached to the United Nations, was going to be distributing that kind of stuff amid the media coverage of DDT. That combined with the fact that, no market in Europe or the United States was going to accept agriculture that was being touched by DDT, right? So it was, the reaction or the effects of this book have a massive global consequence, right? So it's going to force the rest of the world to stop doing it, stop using it, right? It's not being produced anymore. No one's going to distribute this stuff, and no one's going to buy stuff that touches that. So what we have is a partially fulfilled mission of trying to eradicate DDT malaria in the developing world. And then what's going to happen next is evolution will happen next. So we're going to watch this next little bit of this PBS clip. And this is going to say that, the window for eradicating malaria has now closed, right? There was a window, right? That window is now shut. And the reason why the window is shut is because mosquitoes in places like, they're going to case study West Africa, sub-Saharan West Africa, right? Mosquitoes in West Africa are now immune to DDT, right? So what we're seeing here is, because this program was started and the course was not run, we're now 25, 30 years later. I guess we're probably 30, 35 years later. And of course we now have immune immunities, right? And you might be thinking of how are they immune? So let's just kind of play at what you know about Darwinism and about natural selection and about genetic mutation. You generally think that genetic mutation is something that occurs pretty slowly over time. And that is true if you are thinking in terms of human beings. However, if you're thinking in terms of mosquitoes, I did Google it, so who knows if this is right, but I did Google, how many generations per year are there of mosquitoes, and the number came up with like 15, up to 15 generations per year. And I think I also saw that there were hundreds of different species of mosquitoes in West Africa as well. So hundreds of different species of mosquitoes, let's just say 10 to 15 generations per year. Any mutation that will occur, one that will enable populations to be resistant to DDT, are definitely going to be able to have plenty of time, to replicate themselves within the populations. All right, so that we're going to go ahead and watch the remainder of that clip, or a little bit more of it at least.
Burkina Faso tell a different story. Even though DDT was never banned in the fight against insect-borne disease here, the tiny country has become an epicenter of the world's malaria epidemic.
That comment there, I don't really, I guess I don't understand why that comment was made. Yes, it was never banned there. However, we've already talked about other variables that would have resulted in not being used.
During the rainy season, health clinics like this one in the village of Samusu are packed with patients suffering from malaria. Nearly 40% of the country's residents end up contracting the disease every year.
Go to any single healthcare, you will see for yourself. You will see a lot of people with teeth there just laying down on the floor, suffering and then waiting for the treatment.
The problem is that the mosquitoes here have become resistant to the pesticides used against them, including DDT.
Insects are very good at out-evolving constraints. And so all over the world, lots of different insect species develop resistance against DDT.
Mosquitoes that had a genetic propensity to metabolize DDT survived the spraying, and every year, those survivors reproduced and multiplied. In many African countries, that resistance, combined with decades of government neglect, poor infrastructure, and abysmal healthcare systems, to turn malaria into a perfect storm.
In West Africa, we can't really use DDT because the resistance is extremely high everywhere.
DDT didn't work, which is nothing to do with silent spray.
In fact, Carson had warned of this very problem.
Inevitably, it follows that intensive spraying.
Right, and they're about to go through a counter argument to what I had just said. So we'll go ahead and let this play out.
Only makes worse the problem that is designed to solve.
You'll get the insects.
Over the last decade, malaria rates
So it really doesn't contradict it. I just said that.
have come down through a combination of new anti-malarial drugs and insecticide-treated bed bath.
Right, and it's going to continue and just kind of talk about some of the research that's going on today about malaria. So it gets kind of a little bit off topic. Okay. All right. So let's kind of go back and kind of run through this. There is when you talk about the decisions to whether or not DDT should have been stopped, right? Should the mission of eradicating malaria have been continued in the 70s amid that change? I think the answer has been, I think it has been answered. Back in 2006, the WHO, right, and the U.S. aid program, right, launched by, this was then President Bush, they began to advocate the use of DDT to fight malaria. The positives outweighed the negatives. And the EPA's website as well. I went to the EPA website somewhere, I got it up. not going to dig it, you can dig it yourself, I guess. The EPA says the same thing today, right? This hasn't changed from 2006. So there's, when we talk about DDT, there's definitely a way that you could justify using it, right? When you consider the number of deaths per year of, around the world, right? 800,000 plus in sub-Saharan West Africa alone, all right? All right, so let's, when we talk about the environmental movement, I think the Rachel Carson example, and I do have another video on this too, which is interesting. I think I'm going to just post this, and you can watch this on your own if you want. I don't really show this in class necessarily, but it is kind of a similar kind of case against what Carson did, just to kind of show you a different argument, okay, than what your traditional narrative is, okay. So, trying to give you as many different sides as you can on this, okay. When you talk about this, when you're talking about the environmental movement, I think the Rachel Carson story is a really good case study of looking at what the environmental movement is, and maybe not thinking about the unintended consequences of decisions being made in Western countries or people who are advocating change in Western countries, and what the impacts of this stuff is going to be on the developing world, right? When you hear about the developing world or the rest of the world in general, in regards to the environmental movement, it is usually being used as a way to, kind of affect change in the West. Like sea levels are going to go up, the temperature rise in the tropical zone. Those are the typical things that that you often hear. So in class, kind of at this point, I often just kind of present a couple of questions to students. Right. So if you are an advocate of radical change in the United States, radical policy change in the United States, in order to stop, human impacts on the environment, answer a few questions for me, right? And if your answer is yes to these, then I think you are a very serious person, right? In your desire to affect human change, right? So here we go. 1. Do you walk or ride your bike to school? Right? Do you walk or ride your bike to school? I don't ask that question willy-nilly. Before I had children, I did used to ride my bike to school across the causeway. Right? It's about 8 miles or so each way. And it took me a good 25 minutes maybe. It's not like we have hills where we are, so it's not like it's really that major of a thing to do. At least it shouldn't be considered to be, I wouldn't think. Have you replaced, number 2, have you replaced chicken, beef, pork as your source of protein with insects or soy? I guess by insects, I mean like crickets. Okay. Now, if you think the thought of eating crickets as your source of protein, cricket burgers, if you think that sounds disgusting, obviously you've never seen a documentary on, on a commercial pig farm or chicken farm, or watched the hurricane footage in North Carolina a couple of years back when all those retaining ponds from the chicken, from the Purdue farms, got flooded and then went into the river system there. Right. So anyway, so have you, and I guess soy as well, but soil also is pretty intense use of water supply and energy. Right. So really insects. Right. So are you at least trying to replace your source of protein? Have you stopped or have you minimized your use of energy? Do you have a cell phone? You're a 16-year-old, 16, 17-year-old. Do you really need to have a cell phone? like seriously, do you really need to have a cell phone? Why do you have a cell phone, right? So you can, you can text, you can play games, you can, make your TikTok video. I mean, really, why do you need a cell phone, right? So I'll often hear a rebuttal on this one. What I often hear is, oh, what if I drive? What if I break down? And I do have to remind people that 100 years did go by after the invention of the automobile where there was no such thing as a cell phone. And miraculously, we all figured it out. We all somehow took care of it. When it did happen, or I got to call home. And I also have to remind students that there's literally a hardline telephone in every single classroom in the school. And of course, you can go to the main office at any point because that's what we used to do is we'd have to go to the office to call home. Or my parents might have to get a hold of me in an emergency. They can call the office and someone from the office can come and get you. That's actually what happens to like me, right? A teacher, because I don't have my cell phone on during class. If you really cared about the environment, why do you need a cell phone? Really, and I guess you could think of it in terms of energy consumption, but also think about it in terms of the actual cell phone itself. Think about that video we watched about globalization and those giant cargo ships moving all over the world and the carbon footprints of that. And think about the mining that has to happen, the extraction of resources for that cell phone. And think about what's going to happen 3 years from now when you no longer want that cell phone. What's going to happen to that? What's going to happen to that battery? That battery is now toxic waste, right? Needs to be specially, you can't just throw that away, right? That has to be, disposed of very properly. If you really care about the environment, kind of think about those kinds of things. Do you need a TV? Do you get takeout? Right? Do you get takeout from restaurants? We have to wear a mask in school. Do you use a paper one? Right? I mean, we have to use a mask, so I use cloth every day. So what are you saying to planet Earth when you can't remember your cloth mask and you have to borrow the disposable? What's going to happen to those things, right? When you are done your single use of that, right? Kind of wrap your mind around that. Are you drinking out of water bottles, or do you have some kind of reusable water bottle, Hydro Flask, right? Something like that. It is hard to take you serious, right? If you are not making those kinds of choices, right? And and I guess the other thing that you need to kind of start wrapping your mind around, right? When and the reason why I'm asking, are you actually serious about this kind of stuff? Is I showed that in class. I do want to show you. I do want to show you one thing. If you kind of scroll up on the website that you're watching this on right now, if you're really serious about the environment and all that, kind of wrap your mind around this, all right? And kind of the reason why I'm saying all this is, what is your consumption, right? What is your consumption? What is your contribution? Okay, and think to yourself, what if the rest of the world lived like you, right? What if the rest of the world actually viewed those questions, right, and reacted to them the way that you reacted to them? If you really believe that human beings are the primary drivers in the change that's happening to planet Earth, right? If that is what you firmly believe, then what happens if the rest of the world starts to act like you, right? And what does that mean? What does that actually mean? And that's just kind of today. Let me kind of scroll through these next couple of slides. The world's changing, right? When we look at the demographics of planet Earth, right? Nigeria's population, right, estimates 85 to 100 million by 2100, but in your lifetime, right? Kind of towards the end of your life. Bangalore, India, right? Tripling in population in this century. The Democratic Republic of Congo, right? Population estimates from 12 million to 83 million this century, right? One of the fastest growing places on the planet, right? Africa, right? Sub-Saharan West Africa, Central West Africa, South Asia, right? And I'm going to guess this number is probably increasing with the abandonment of the one-child policy in China, right? You're probably going to see that number increasing, right? So, well, I mean, what does it mean, right? If you're not willing to make those most basic choices and you believe that humans are primary drivers of climate change, what does that mean, right? What are the implications of this? If you don't want to change your lifestyle, then what does that mean, right? What are the world, because this is a world history class, what are the global implications of this, right? So, you can't be a person who espouses environmental change and all that kind of stuff, live the way that the average American does and be taken serious, because what you're actually saying is that, I believe in this, and I also believe that the rest of the world has to remain, kind of increasingly in a state of poverty, so I can continue, right, to exploit them and live off from that, right? So, kind of wrap your mind. If you truly believe in that, in the movement, understand that. All right. So, also, if you believe that we do need to radically change, right, the way our world is, okay, think about the COVID-19 shutdowns that happened last year, right? Think about the economic impact. Now, since this is a world history class, I'm not asking you to think about the economic impact, right? The economic impact in the United States. What have you heard on the news about the economic impact of the COVID-19 shutdowns in East Africa, in Sub-Saharan West Africa? How about in Bangladesh, right? What are the economic impacts of this simple shutdowns, right? Nothing that radical. I mean, barely, only a couple weeks here in the South, right? Southern part of the United States that we shut down for. And I'm going to assume that that's probably not even on your radar. I apologize if you are familiar with this, right? But there is an old saying that when the United States when the United States has a sniffle, or when the United States sneezes, the developing world catches pneumonia, okay? So, right, if you have been following what's going on in the developing world, right, you know that there's been some pretty negative effects of that. So let's kind of apply this out to your proposed climate initiatives, right, that we're seeing. Take something, even the most basic thing. Let's say I want to try to convince people to go away from using fossil fuels as a source of energy, so I'm going to put a tax on gasoline, right? Let's say the price of gas goes up from what it currently is, around $2 and something a gallon. Let's say it goes up to in the United States, what it probably is, I'm going to guess in Europe, it's probably $6 to $8 a gallon right now, depending upon where in Europe you are. What happens if that goes down in the United States, right? What do we know? We know that people in the United States are, financially pretty precarious, right? People think the United States is very rich, but, the average American, I think, has something like, you can hear this almost like $400 in the bank of excess money, So, most people are living paycheck to paycheck, right? Don't have major savings. So what's going to happen if the price of gas goes up, a few dollars a gallon just to get to where Europe is right now? What's going to happen is that thing is going to get, that thing is obviously going to make its way through the commercial chain. That means the price of food is going to go up, the price of clothing is going to go up, the price of everything will go up. Okay. And, and this is going to obviously affect consumer decisions, right? So just by raising the price of gasoline, one can assume that consumption of goods is going to decrease around the world, which means demand for things that are being produced in Asia, in Africa, in the developing world, demand for those things are going to go down, and there will be a ripple effect across the global economy. Okay, and this is one of those things where, like Rachel Carson, right, very well intentioned, right, and decisions made were probably right for the United States, but implications, right, outside of Western countries were not considered. Okay? And these are, I am simply pointing this out, just maybe you've never thought of this before, right? Or maybe this is something that needs to be considered a little bit more, right? Is the global implications of policy change. Okay, not saying that things don't have to be changed at all. Just saying we need to kind of take a more macro view of the effects, because that is the skill we're supposed to be talking about today. All right, I'm just going to really briefly kind of hit this, just to kind of introduce you to it. So feel free to pause and read through this about the Green Belt movement in Kenya, because I'm guessing you're probably not familiar with that. Here's a couple of infographics about the Green Belt movement. An aerial photograph of the Green Belt movement, the impacts of it, right, 1975, next to a 2003 image. And here's a photograph taken in 2004, showing you the impacts of it. Okay, not going to do that today. All right, and also I just want to kind of other things to think of. If you are, because you often kind of hear in, as part of certain movements, people talking about eliminating GMOs, genetically modified seeds, right, GM seeds. I've heard Monsanto attack, multiple times over the years, right, for that. You hear people criticizing pesticides like DDT, right? And we need to eliminate usage of pesticides. Everything needs to be organic, sustainable. One other kind of consequence to think about is if you want to eliminate genetically modified seeds, if you want to eliminate pesticides, what do you think the demographic impact is going to be around the world, since, right, the world population is where it is as a result of the Green Revolution, right? The Green Revolution and massive use of genetically modified seeds and pesticides. Okay. If you have not watched the video on, let me just kind of show you where it is. If you have not watched the little quick video on Green Revolution, I don't really talk about it because your Strayer textbook does go into it, I think so, or I know it does. So I'm not really going to spend a lot of time in class on this. But I did post a little video on my 9.1 because that's where it is in the curriculum. There's a little video on there. There's a really good Khan Academy on it, and I think I posted the link for that as well, right? So Green Revolution. If you have not watched this Khan Academy and gone through those resources that are online, I highly encourage you to do so. Green Revolution it was a DBQ a few years back. And I think it was an SAQ as well 2 or 3 years ago. I forget which now. It is a high probability topic, right? So, if you didn't do your reading, then do your reading, or you can watch those videos as well, right? One kind of interesting thing about the Green Revolution is you can definitely contextualize it within the Cold War, right? Because that quote that comes off that video, is a great quote, right? So the Green Revolution is going to be funded and supported by Western countries because it does help, help prevent famine, and of course, lack. When a society is not hunger, it makes it less susceptible to revolution, specifically spread of communism during the Cold War. All right, so feel free to pause and go reading through these. I'm just going to skim through. Some classes I make it through this, some classes I don't. I pulled a lot of these docs off from the Green Revolution DBQ. That was a few years ago. If there's anything on here that you want some help interpreting or sourcing, please let me know. I think that might be from a multiple choice question. All right, so this is just kind of looking at population numbers as a whole. So this is not really a document, but this is kind of a good document to read through as well. All right, and another. so many Green Revolution documents out there. Right. Notice a lot of them are India, right? So, but obviously, Green Revolution tech is used around the world, right? Today, the entire world is dependent on this. Here's a good, social impact, social effects, okay, which is always a great angle to be aware of. All right, Guatemala. All right, so seeing a Latin American connection on that document. All right, and Strayer does use this word. Right? Strayer does use this word in your homework from last night. So just kind of throw that in there. I did come across this article a few years back, right? So back in 2014. So if you are interested, I guess I'll make it a little bigger so you can pause and read this if you want. That's probably too big. All right, there we go. So yeah, so Stanford biologist. Okay, so I'll just leave it here so you can pause for a second, and I'll scroll down. All right, and so yeah, there's this whole belief that the process has already begun, right? That we are in the age of human influenced biological impacts. Okay. So, all right, let's debrief and summarize, and that is a lot to read. So let me just read the highlights, and you can feel free to pause and read the some notes. Key takeaways: ability to exploit the world's resources at a level of consumption have increased dramatically in the past century, no doubt. All right, global population as a contributing factor. All right, so people's concerns about climate change are simply being exacerbated by the really rapid growth in human population. Environmental movements in the global south, vastly different perspective than in the industrialized world. Okay, so average North American in the 1990s used 50 to 100 times more energy than the average Bangladeshi. Right, so, but you're not willing to give up a hamburger, right? And you are an advocate of environmentalism. All right, so right, and then this is a website. It used to be live. I don't even know what happened to this website. So when you click on it, it still goes to the website. And it's kind of interesting, So, and what this does is kind of looks at the reality of climate change, and like I said before, nobody argues that climate change is not real, But yeah, I don't know what happened to this site. It used to be kind of a cool site. It just kind of basically looked at the last couple 100,000 years and looked at like global temperature, and the writing shows you, the writing shows you like what was going on. So it's kind of a neat little site. It doesn't seem to work anymore. So apologize for that. All right. That is all for today. Sapriati.